Crime Book Club. Thank you for joining us this Too Hot Wednesday. Not my kind of weather at all, as we discuss the pyramid murders with Fiona Veitch Smith. So did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. It's Veitch as in beach, yes.
Excellent. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the pyramid murders.
Right. Well, I'm Fiona Veitch Smith, as you've just said, and I'm the author of 2 murder mystery series set in the golden age of murder mysteries in the 1920s and 30s. My first series, Poppy Denby Investigates, set in the 20s, and then my new series is the Miss Clara Vale Mysteries, which starts in 1929. And as you rightly say, Sam, my latest book in that, which is number 3 in the series, is The Pyramid Murders. And it's, as suggested by the cover and the name, it's set in Egypt. Now, Miss Clara Vale is a lady detective, and she has a degree in chemistry, and she always wanted to be a scientist, but was unable to get a job in the field of science. And then she inherited a detective agency from her uncle up in Newcastle upon Tyne. When she is cleaning out his house, she comes across an entire collection of Egyptian artifacts and decides to donate it to a museum. When she's there, they have a big opening exhibition of this new, an exhibition of her uncle's artifacts at this museum. And the British Museum send up a mummy as part of the exhibition, just to spice it up a little bit and get the television cameras there. And when they open the mummy at this exhibition, they discover that actually it's not an ancient mummy at all, but it's someone who's been murdered very recently indeed, and is being disguised as a mummy. And Clara then has to go on an adventure with her assistant Bella, and they head off to Cairo in order to discover who this poor murder victim is. Oh, and there's also some smuggled artifacts as well that they discover along the way. And they get there any way they can, by train, by ship, by plane in 1930, and by automobile. So it's a little bit of a round the world in 80 days feel to it, until they get to Cairo and try to find out who the murder victim is and who the murderer is.
One of the things that made me laugh straight away was when you get to the scene where there's lots of people there for this event, and they open the sarcophagus, and straight away, Clara's colleague, not colleague, but the lady that she's with,
Daphne, the archaeologist.
Thank you, Daphne. They kind of look at each other as Daphne's like mutters. She's smiling for the crowd, and she turns and says, "That's not the right body. That's not. I wrote down the Amantuka. That's not Amantuka." And then carries on with a smile, and it really made me laugh, because what else do you do in that situation? Yeah. I just thought it was really funny and a really clever way of doing it.
Yeah, it's not the real mummy, but they'll talk about it later. Smile for the cameras. Now, I got the idea for the mummy. That's where the whole book came from, is that I was reading, I collect vintage books set in the period, and I was reading a book of the British Museum collection of artifacts in 1930. And in there, they had a section on mummies. And they said it takes 70 days to mummify a body. And when I read that, I thought, my goodness, I didn't know that. And what a brilliant idea, because perhaps now I can actually disguise a modern murder victim as a mummy. And that's where the idea came from. And the whole book then developed from that, is what if it's not an ancient mummy, and what if it's a modern day 1930 murder victim.
I like the detail as well of how, because Clara's a scientist, we should say that. Yeah. How Clara, is roped in to help with the testing, and she's kind of, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm not, and her skills are very important to dating, the mummy.
Yeah.
So was there research for that?
Well, for my research, yes. Well, obviously I don't know how to date a mummy, so got a few in the cupboard, but I haven't dated them yet. Yes, I have a friend who's actually a member of the UK Crime Book Club, Jason Monaghan, and he's an archaeologist.
We love Jason.
And he suggested someone at Teesside University who is an expert in forensic pathology. And his name slipped my mind. Tim, it'll come to me. And I contacted him. Jason put me in touch with him, and I contacted him and talked him through what type of things we could look at for Clara to look at to decide that, you know, how to date that it wasn't an ancient mummy, it was a modern mummy, and what processes she could perhaps use. So yes, I did some research by simply asking an expert, which we usually do that, authors. We don't know everything ourselves, and we try as much as possible to find someone else who knows what they're talking about and just chat to them. And they're usually very, very generous with their time, as this man was.
How lovely. I'd like to just take it back a little bit. So this is the third book in the series.
Yes.
So you have the Picture House Murders, the Pantomime Murders, and then the Pyramid Murders.
That's right.
So why? What made you decide to start a new series with Clara?
With Clara Vale, right? Well, rewinding a few years.
Yeah.
Poppy Denby was my first series, and the publisher that she was with, I was with Poppy as well there. We had 6 books together. The first book was shortlisted for the CWA Dagger, Historical Dagger. And so it did very well. And so as a result of that, we had a 6-book series. And I was ready to carry on writing Poppy because I absolutely love her. She's not a scientist. She's a journalist, a young journalist in London. And she actually comes from the Northeast and goes down to London. And when I wrote Clara, I did her coming the other way. And the series, unfortunately, came to an end when the publisher went under. And they had to sell. The publisher was bought out by another publisher who specialized in nonfiction and children's books, and in fact published some of my children's books, but wasn't really wasn't focused on adults. Sorry,
the joys of being live.
If you can still hear me over the ice cream truck, there you go.
There we go.
But as I was saying, the publisher went under, a new publisher took it on and weren't going to continue with the adult fiction line. And so my agent and I discussed it and thought, well, I need to start a new series so she can start pitching it around. And that's where Miss Clara Vale started as a new series. I would have been carrying on writing Poppy, actually, I think, if that hadn't happened. But I didn't, and now I've got Miss Clara Vale, who I actually tried to make quite, even though it's the same period, I tried to make her quite different from Poppy Denby in character.
So Poppy Denby, 6 books.
Yeah.
Any future for Poppy?
Oh, I hope so. But I can't. I don't know when I will write more Poppy books, but I can't say when. What I can tell you is that my new publisher has just taken on the rights to Poppy and will be republishing those 6 books with new covers, and they're going to be released later, hopefully later this year and into next year. So if people go online now, they'll probably only be able to find some secondhand print copies. That the audio is still out there because it's with another publisher, WF House, but there isn't a digital and ebook version of it out at the moment. But my new publisher will be republishing it, and so 6 Poppy books will come out again. And will there be another Poppy book? I do hope so, but I can't say because I've just been contracted to do another 2 Clara books. And that's going to take me a couple of years to write those. And then after that, we'll see whether it'll be Poppy or Clara. Perhaps they can have a fight about it and see who comes out top.
Maybe you could write one of each.
I could write one, take turns, yeah. Very ladylike.
I was looking at your website and I saw a gorgeous, gorgeous picture of a dress that you'd made and you wearing said dress.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that because I'd love to be able to make dress. I'm a bit clumsy, so I'm not sure that it'd stay on. But you just looked absolutely beautiful in this dress that you'd made. It was absolutely stunning.
It started with Poppy, with the very first Poppy book for her launch. I decided that I was going to make a dress from a 1920s pattern. And to get into I like to try to get into character as much as possible. And so I thought I would try to make a dress that Poppy would wear and then wear it and sort of just be in character. And I managed to find a place in the US that sold patterns that were actually old 1920s patterns. And so I got this pattern and then made a dress from it. And this is now 9 9-10 years ago now. And it was really very, very difficult. I do sew, but the instructions on these 1920s patterns are so sparse because they assume that everyone can sew in those days. And of course, we don't now. And so I struggled with it, but I made this dress. And then since then, for every new book that I bring out, I try to make a new dress or a new outfit that the character would wear. So I've got quite a few of them out there. And that one
it's going away. It's fine.
Going away. If you go down to the woods today as well. So the one you saw, was it the sort of the teal coloured one with the tie at the front? Yeah. That's the latest one that I've just made, and that was actually from a 1920. Clara's in 1930, and that's actually the closest I could get was a 1932 pattern. And it's Chanel inspired. It was a Chanel ripoff, essentially. It was I wanted a German designer. Sorry, you got me started. A German designer managed to get hold of a Chanel dress and copied it and put together this pattern. And that dress was from that. And so it's what in the Pyramid Murders, Clara's friend is a fashion designer, and she makes costumes for the theatre. And in the next book, in fact, they're going to go off to Berlin with this fashion designer. So, yeah, you'll have seen dresses on my website, and I tend to make them. But don't look too closely at the seams. They're not that tidy. But from a distance and on the camera, they all look all right.
They really do. It was a gorgeous dress. I wanted to ask you about your research for this book, and then we'll ask about the next one. Mm-hmm. So the research for this book, I said to you before we started, you research in style. Do you want to tell us about the research that you've done yourself and with friends?
Yeah. Well, the Pyramid Murders, I was just telling you before we started, Poppy, in her fourth adventure, was supposed to go off to Egypt, and it was called the Cairo Brief. And she was supposed to go, and I was ready. A friend of mine and I were going to go to Egypt together. And then there were some terrorist attacks in Egypt, and everything was shut down, and tourists weren't allowed into the sites. And so we had to cancel our trip. And I thought, I can't really write about Egypt. I couldn't pretend Poppy was going to Egypt without me going to Egypt. I tried to go to the very place, whether it's just as simple as Newcastle or London or York. The second book is set in York. I tried to go to those places and actually walk the streets as they would, and know how long it takes to get from here to there, being chased by a murderer, for instance. So I do try to do as much research as I possibly can. And I get guidebooks. I get old 1920s and 30s guidebooks, and I follow the maps in those books. So finally, when I got to Clara, I thought, you know what? I still want to go to Egypt, and I'm going to make damn sure that Clara goes, just so I can go as well. And and she did. She went to Cairo, and I had to go with her, of course. And my friend Helen came as my assistant, just like Bella went as Clara's assistant. And lots of things in the book are places that I went to and things that I experienced, and obviously I just transposed it back 100 years into what Clara would have experienced. So yes, I had an absolutely brilliant time. Got a hotel just over the road from the pyramid, so I had a Pyramid View hotel, and went to all the places. The only thing that didn't happen is I wasn't chased by a murderer, unfortunately, through the pyramids.
No, fortunately.
Fortunately.
We are very glad that you were not chased through the pyramids by a murderer. We've got some hellos on I'm having to flick between pages, so I apologise if anyone can hear me clicking. We've got Kaz, Karen and Donna have said hello. I know Donna was excited for this because she I'd only just put the post up to set the stream up for tonight, and she'd already reacted to it, so I know she was pleased to be watching.
Hi Donna.
With Clara, what was the decision behind giving her a scientific background? I mean, it keeps it.
There was actually
such a nice twist to the book, such depth.
That has its roots in Poppy as well. In Poppy Denby 6, The Crystal Crypt, that book started when I was listening to the radio while folding washing, as you do. And Melvin Bragg was on, and he was talking about a scientist, a woman scientist, British scientist called Dorothy Hodgkin. and she won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1963. And she was the very first British woman, first and last actually, to win the Nobel Prize on her own for chemistry. And for years, she had been, she was very instrumental. She was instrumental in the treatment of diabetes. I'll just simplify it. It's obviously a very chemical thing behind it, but the importance really is how it applies to diabetes and the discovery and the treatment of diabetes. And scientists thought she was an incredible woman, incredible scientist, but she'd never been put forward for the Nobel Prize. And eventually, this particular year, the male scientists who'd been put forward for the prize all got together and said, we're actually going to refuse the prize unless you give it to Dorothy Hodgkin. And which was just wonderful. They said she's so brilliant and she's been so overlooked for all these years that they said it has to go to her. And then the Nobel Committee gave in and gave her the prize, I was folding my washing thinking, isn't this wonderful? This woman's been affirmed and everything. And then they said that the very next day, the newspaper headlines in the UK were Oxford housewife wins Nobel Prize. And it was so insulting. And I was just, despite folding my washing there myself, I was just so insulted and shocked for her that this is the way that she'd been treated. And so then I went out of my way to read as much as I could about her. I thought I got her biography and I read up on her. And when I did, I discovered that she was she was in Oxford, and that her laboratory was in the basement of what's now the Science Museum in Oxford. And I had just been there. I had my old publisher was in Oxford, and I used to go down there quite a lot. And when I read that she had her laboratory was in that basement, I started to think, oh my goodness, I could see it, I could imagine it. And then I thought, you know what, we need to have a scientist in this book. And that was the crystal crypt. Unfortunately, the scientist in that book is murdered. But I read up a whole lot about 1920s science while I was doing that book, because I had to have this dead scientist who was not respected in her time like Dorothy. Dorothy wasn't murdered, bless her. She went on and led a great life, personally and professionally. But the scientist in my book, June Layton, was murdered. But I'd got all of this science, this 1920s science in my mind, and was surprised how much I actually understood of it. I mean, I've just done an A-level in science from 35 years ago, so I'm not a very long time ago, but there was enough in there that I could actually understand the gist of it. It wasn't completely lost to me. And I thought, you know what? I think I understand enough of this to create a character who is a scientist. And then because I'd killed off June in Poppy Denby number 6, I felt guilty about that. I thought, no, I have to have a live scientist now. And so Miss Clara Vale was then born from that as a scientist, a woman scientist, and I used a lot of the information that I'd gained from that previous book in creating her. And she too, like Dorothy Hodgkin, went to Oxford University, to Somerville College, and so I had quite a few intersections with the real life Dorothy Hodgkin with Clara Vale. And of course, Clara goes on to live quite a different life from Dorothy Hodgkin, but that's where the idea of the scientist came from.
Do you think that the story of Dorothy Hodgkin and the men who, gave up a huge thing for her, they really did something more than just a little worthwhile for the cause. Do you think that impacted on how Clara handles the men who try to patronize her, all the misogyny that she has to deal with, and she handles beautifully? Do you think that had an impact there?
Absolutely. All my books, if you were to go back and read my Poppy Denby books, deal with misogyny, but they're not anti-men at all. I have two sets of men in my books. Definitely. I have men who are wonderfully affirming, like those scientists.
I have completely lost Fiona. I don't know if you can hear me, Fiona, but I have completely lost your sound and you are frozen on my screen. So, nope. You came back and now I'm all by myself. Let's have a look at the comments that I've got so far. So, Donna, you love that story. So is that the story about Dorothy Hodgkin? Or is it one of the books that we're discussing? It's a crime story. No one is sage, even the scientist. Brilliant. I'm hoping that Fiona clicks a button and comes back. This is the week of tech gremlins. There is no there is no excuse for this technical mess that this week has been. Things not working, things not happening. I am very much hoping that we get Fiona back. Oh, and we have 3, 2, 1. And we've almost got Fiona back. It'd be a good start if it happens. So The Pyramid Murders is the third book in the Clara Vale series. And as Fiona said, when the book, quite near to the opening, there's kind of a fancy party and lots of people standing around, and this sarcophagus is opened, and the mummy that is inside is not the one that they expect. And that is the catalyst for setting off all of these different things that happen. And I'm just having a look at Fiona now. What a week this has been for technical disasters. I will be asking Fiona about book 4 as well, if we can get back. And we will see what happens. How typical, halfway. So we've had half an interview earlier this week with Harry at F. Townsend. And now, hopefully, we're not stopping at half an interview with Fiona. So, Donna, you said, oh no, she's back-ish. I can't see anything except a blue screen. And Fiona is desperately trying to come back in. So, fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. Typical, okay. It is the heat. It is ruining everything. Should have seen my hair for, what did I do? Oh, it was when I was talking to Penny Batchelor last night, which is on YouTube for anyone who missed it. I know there were some tech gremlins there as well. It's like Monica out of Friends. The hair was massive yesterday, Donna. Absolutely huge. So fingers crossed, and let's see if we can get, oh, yay, hello.
That was really weird. It was like being at a seance. I could see you and I could hear you, and I was speaking to you and say, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And there was nothing.
Nothing. Had a completely like blue screen.
I'm back.
Brilliant. So, where were we? I've just given people
no idea. Dorothy, talking about men who are supporters of women and those who are trying to oppress them. That I chose the period that I wrote in for this particular reason, because it was such a pivotal time for the advancement of women. Women during the First World War had started to get into jobs, and a lot of the suffragettes had fought battles for us. And as a result of that, we partially got the vote in 1918. And various professions were beginning to open up for us. But there was still a lot of opposition to women in various professions, and sometimes from other women. In fact, other women didn't want women to go into various professions. And so I set the books at that period in order for it to be that transition time and to show the battles that women had in trying to get recognized and acknowledged and to forge their own paths, and to show the men that opposed them and the men that supported them. Because there were male suffragettes as well, which no one seems to ever know about. There were male supporters of the suffragist movement. and they're so easily forgotten by history, and it's supposedly just all the women, and it wasn't. It was the strong male supporters, and I don't want to forget them in my books. And so in Poppy Denby and Clara Vale, you will have the misogynists, and you will have those who actually are really the good guys and see the worth of women.
And you do need the balance. I mean, if the book was all horrible, horrible men, there would be no balance at all to it. It wouldn't work as a story, because it would just feel very like a bashing of men, rather than showing people as they really are. You know, not one of us is perfect. We all have these different aspects to our personality. And I think a book that doesn't reflect that probably isn't going to captivate the readers.
Yeah, well, hopefully I've achieved that balance, because I haven't had too many complaints. Oddly, the only complaints I've had about that sort of thing have come from a couple of women. I've had a couple of women who have complained, said that I'm male bashing, and I've said to them, you know, have you actually read books? What about all these other characters? And they said, oh, no, I'm male bashing. I've never had any complaints from men.
I don't think you're male bashing.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You mentioned earlier that the dress that you made, it helps you get into character.
Yeah.
Do you do anything else to get into character? I mean, obviously you read a lot.
Yeah.
So, but are there other things that you feel are important for you as an author to do?
Well, as I said, I try to, let me see what I've got here. Yeah, here we go. I try to get guidebooks of the period, and this is one for Berlin, and I don't have the one for Egypt at hand, but I do. I had one that I took to Egypt with me, and it really, I read those books because they were written at the time, and it tells you exactly what things, not just what things cost, but the sections in there about what to do if you've got a dicky tummy, for instance. And in the Pyramid Murders, I quote from that book quite a lot. And be careful not to get a chill, and don't go in the Nile at certain times, because you might get a chill, and the undercurrents might get you. And beware this camel, and beware that native. And it's that sort of period stuff for the traveller that they would need to know, that I read up on that, and I imagine what it would be like for the character, for Clara or for Poppy, to actually be in that time. I walk the streets as much as I can. If Clara is going, when she goes to Berlin, she's going by ferry and then by train. I will be going by ferry and by train. Unfortunately, couldn't afford the cruise to Egypt that Clara went on, but I did the scene where she gets when she's on the airplane and flying over the pyramids. I actually wrote that scene when I was on a plane flying over the pyramids and seeing them for the very first time. And I had my notebook with me, and I was actually jotting down, imagining what Clara would be seeing and thinking at that moment when seeing the pyramids for the very first time. And of course, for her, it was also the very first time she'd ever flown as well. It wasn't for me. So I was writing down exactly what she saw. So that particular scene, hopefully when the readers read it, it will be a sense of authenticity to it. So yeah, I get into character as much as I can. There's films in the Picture House Murders, set in a picture house in an old cinema, and there's a Charlie Chaplin film being screened, and so I will watch that Charlie Chaplin film. It starts off with another film called The Canary Murders. I watch that film. So I try to watch and to read and to wear as much of the fashion and listen to the music of the period as well. Particularly in Poppy books, there's quite a lot of jazz in there, 1920s jazz, and I listen to as much of that as possible. Not so much in the Clara books. So I do my best, but in the end, as it says in the go-between, I think that the past is another country, and it's still got to be imagined, because I, as a 21st century woman, can't really know what it was like to be there. And you just imagine as much as you can, and you take with you your 21st century views as well. And I don't try to hide that. I am a 21st century woman, and the concerns of a 21st century woman are the concerns that I like to explore in my Poppy and Clara books. The fact that 100 years later, And there's still some professions that women struggle to get ahead in, for instance. That hasn't changed in 100 years. Childcare is still an issue. That's explored in some of my books as well. So the issues of today that were issues then and are still issues are things that I tend to pick up on.
One of the things that hasn't changed, that must be quite a rare thing for an author when they're doing the research, is you flying over the pyramids. You've got the same view that Clara would have had back then.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as you're facing the right way, and where you don't realise until you either travel there or see the pictures just how close the pyramids are to the rest of civilization. But you would have had the same view that she would have had. But obviously you take your views and the fact that you have flown before, but the view would have been exactly the same, which must be quite a rare thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certain parts of the world, obviously, that haven't changed as much. Cairo has changed a lot. Cairo is this huge city now, and there's a 6-lane highway between my hotel and the pyramids, where in Clara's day it was beautiful. There was a beautiful river there. They've dammed the river up. It's not there anymore. So things have changed. Some ancient things are still there, the pyramids and that. And Saqqara, the second place that she goes to, is very much as it was. So there isn't, and the Egyptian Museum as well, that hasn't changed very much. So there's certain things that's helpful that it hasn't changed very much. Anything I set in London, in central London, it's quite easy. I set in York, things haven't changed that much. Newcastle upon Tyne has actually changed a lot. And that there's quite a lot of differences there that you have to research. And then when I'm going to Berlin with her, I haven't been to Berlin before, but as everyone tells me, most of it was bombed. So the Berlin of now is not the Berlin of 1930.
Wow.
And that's going to be tricky. So it's so easy to walk around pyramids imagining Clara 100 years ago doing it and doing it in exactly the same way. And the camels are still there, and there's people trying to sell you trinkets are still there, all the same. But walking in Berlin, it will be quite different. So this is going to be quite an interesting experience for me. I'm reading up as much as I can about Berlin in that period and novels that were written at that time. And but experientially, it could be quite different. So we'll see how that comes out.
And that's for book 4?
That's actually book 5. Book 4.
Yeah, okay.
Book 5, Clara and me need some time at home. So I thought I'd just have an imaginary house in Northumberland. So it's a lot easier. So we've got it's based on a blend of 2 Northumberland manor houses that I know of, and I've brought them together in a fictional house. So it's set just up the road in a place called Newbiggin-on-Sea, which anyone from this area will know about. And it's to do with coal mining. It's 1930, it's the Great Depression. And coal mines are being shut down because the industry is is collapsing due to the depression, and there's repercussions with that. And so you've got the old aristocratic families who own everything trying to desperately hang on to their wealth. And there's Clara gets to know some trade unionists. So it's sort of a labor, the needs of the worker and the labor and the old aristocratic families in conflict is sort of the theme of it. But of course there's lots of fun and there's lots of fashion as well. And that dress, the dress, is the dress that Clara wears on her very first night to a grand dinner. She comes down the stairs wearing that dress that Juju Levine has made for her, and that's what she's going to be wearing, and that's what I made it for that. And so that's book 4. Book 5 is in Berlin, and I've been contracted for those 2 so far.
Fantastic.
And then I'll probably need a rest again.
Yeah, maybe after that, especially with the travelling that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine that travelling and doing the research, so you're constantly taking notes, you're trying to enjoy your time there and soak up everything. But your mind must constantly be busy with different details. Constantly.
I'm very aware that it's actually a work trip, and people I'm with, it can get quite frustrating for them. My friend Helen, who came along with me, sort of being the Bella, and I mean, she came very, and she really did assist me, and she helped me as much as she can. But it was also her holiday.
Yeah.
You know, she paid for her half of it, and yet we're lying at the pool, and she's got her cocktail then, wanting to relax, and there I am with my notebook scribbling away. And I remember her saying to me at one point, "Don't you ever relax?" And I just simply couldn't. I was there to work, and even when I was lying at the pool, I was imagining what would happen. And then Berlin, my husband's coming with me for that, and he's bound to moan and complain as well about me doing work, but at the same time knowing that that's why we're there. But yeah, it isn't a holiday, and you've got to be always wondering, would Clara have eaten this? Would she have drunk that? What might she have done at this particular road, crossing this particular road? Yeah, I mean, all of that. It's Berlin. I'm going there in September, and the book is set in September. So I'll need to be looking at what flowers are there, and what what the trees are looking like, what the temperature is. That so I will have to. It's work. It's unfortunately not a holiday. A holiday for me is we've got a cottage in a place called Rothbury, which is only half an hour up the road, and it's in the middle of a sheep field, and I just do nothing for a week. That's a holiday for me. And try not to write. Yeah, try not to write. But if I were ever to set a book there, it would ruin it for me, because I would be my mind would get going again.
That's interesting. So are there places that you want to go and write about, and also places that you want to visit knowing that you won't write about them, because then it would kind of spoil that area that you've got, that boundary?
Yes, that's the thing. I've been thinking about setting something in Malta, but at the same time I want to go. I have been to Malta before, and I want to go back there, but I know that if I go there, it's going to be an exhausting work, writing, research time, rather than just relaxing. And even so I need to think about that. But financially as well, it's all my little trips. The work justifies me spending that money as well. Yeah. So it's so it's not as if I've got endless amounts of money that I can choose to go to the Maldives for a holiday and then head off to Buenos Aires for research. I can't afford that at all, So I tend to try to bring the two together, but not always successfully.
When you are moving forward with the next two books in the series, is book 4 now complete?
No, I'm at 51,500 words, if you must know. When I stopped writing today, I was at 51,500. So no, it's not complete. So that's due at the end of September. And then the Berlin, I'm starting research in the Berlin. I'm trying not to research it because I'm still finishing this other one, but I am starting to research it. So I'm heading off there in September, in the same month that I'm trying to finish the book 4. Somehow I'll manage. And the only time I could go, because I needed someone to look after my dogs, and that's the only time they could look after the dogs, was in the middle of September. Otherwise, I would have waited a little while. So no, it's not finished, and the Berlin one will need to be finished at the end of June or July next year. So the number 4 will be coming out probably in January. That's hopefully, we haven't actually got a release date, but I think that's when it'll be.
So you've got a time period roughly to aim for.
Yeah.
I want to go back to. I've been fascinated by Egypt since I was a child in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
There was always something. There was always an art project, or we'd be writing stories, or there'd be something, and it is captivating. It really is. So when you were researching for book 3, The Pyramid Murders, I was picking up little details throughout the books, such as specialist crowbars, to open a sarcophagus.
Yes.
I never really considered how these things, and they're going to be opened gently. You don't see things, but it just never occurred to me just how many specialist tools there must be.
Yeah, I got that all from the British Museum book on the 1930s collection. because they were beginning this. It's quite interesting, the period they were beginning to bring in more scientific methods into archaeology. A chap called Flinders Petrie, and he founded a marvelous museum, which if you're in London and you're bored with the British Museum, pop around the corner to Goodge Street, I think it is, and the Petrie Museum of Archaeology is there. And
you mentioned that in your acknowledgements,
because that's the type of collection Uncle Bob would have, and it's very different from the British Museum. But anyway, I digress. This character, Flinders Petrie, was one of the people who began to introduce a scientific method to archaeology, and it started coming in round about this period, about 10-20 years period. And at the beginning, they would just go in there with any old axe and crowbar and, crack it open. And so much damage was done to the artifacts and to the tombs and to the mummified remains themselves, that they started to develop a scientific method and using proper tools to do things to try and minimize as much as possible the damage and that could be done. And some of it, of course, is too late. It's already been destroyed. And it wasn't just the archaeologists who destroyed it. There were grave robbers who came before the archaeologists. Some would argue the archaeologists are just fancy grave robbers anyway. But that's another discussion. But a lot of damage was already done just by grave robbers who would hack things off walls and floors and things, and to try to sell it on what we would consider now to be the black market, but then wasn't a black market. It was the antiquities market. But you could literally go down to a market in downtown Cairo and buy yourself something from a king's pharaoh's tomb back in the day. And so the pyramid murders is all about trying the period in which they're trying to start controlling all of that. And it was the opening of King Tut's tomb. Try to say that quickly. King Tut's tomb in 1922. More T's in there. That the Egyptians, it didn't just start there, but particularly at that point, they started to try and want to bring more control about what left the country and what was kept there. And it's that conflict that we deal with in the pyramid murders. And again, this thing of the 21st century is we can't get away from that. Those discussions are still being had. And the British Museum and not just the British Museum, museums around the world, although we tend to just think about the British Museum, but museums around the world have artifacts from not just Egypt, but from many other nations. And the debate is still here about what should be returned and what shouldn't be returned and why not. And those discussions were already starting back in the time of my book, The Pyramid Murders.
Sarah says, let me just click back to this. She'll come with you on a research trip and she wouldn't complain. And I believe her.
Sarah, you've got the job.
I can just see you both chatting away, notebooks, maybe a cocktail or a cup of tea, whatever your beverage of choice is. I can just see, Sarah would be a great asset on one of those trips. Absolutely.
I need an assistant who doesn't complain. No, Helen was brilliant. It was just the odd time where they were saying, don't you ever stop? But she was absolutely brilliant otherwise. I would say, I need to find this, I need to find that. She would be looking on the vintage maps with me and trying to figure out. It was actually very helpful because she was an archaeologist in a previous, not archaeologist, what am I saying? People who design buildings, architect. There you go. Yeah, she was an architect in a previous life, and she was actually very useful with that because she would help me read. She was helping me to read maps and plans and all sorts of things. So she was quite useful.
Donna's saying the museum in Cairo is stunning.
Yes, absolutely. There's now they've been building a new museum. In Giza and Cairo, a bit like Newcastle and Gateshead, they're twin cities on opposite sides of the river. And everyone forgets about Gateshead and just calls it Newcastle. And it's the same with Giza and Cairo. Is actually the pyramids. Those pyramids are not in Cairo at all. They're in Giza, which is a separate city. But anyway, I digress once more.
We like a digression. Please don't apologise for digressing.
Is actually in Cairo. But even though the pyramids and that are in Giza, But then now the Egyptian government has been building a new fancy air-conditioned, which is very important, museum in Giza, and they've been moving over quite a lot of the artifacts. Quite a lot of the Ramesses collection has now moved over to that new museum, but it hadn't quite opened yet when I was there. But that was good for me because walking around a beautiful modern air-conditioned museum wouldn't be the same as Clara going into that museum, and the aircon doesn't work very well in the old Egyptian museum. And I literally had a fan with me. Well, I blame the aircon. It was probably me having a menopause moment, but it was really hot. But the aircon,
it's okay to blame it on the heat in Egypt, I'm sure.
But I had a young guide with me. He was very, very knowledgeable. But I was sort of having this very hot, sweaty moment with my fan, and I needed to go to the toilet to try and recover. And then all he said is, "Yes, ladies of your age always do."
Delightful.
Clara, of course, doesn't have to worry about any of that. But yes, the museum was marvelous, particularly because it was old and it was just like it would be in Clara's day. And of course, there was the entire the Tutankhamun collection. There was absolutely incredible, and to actually stand in front of that gold mask was just breathtaking. Even though you've seen it so many times in pictures and in books, to stand in front of it, and you've only got a couple of minutes. It's like the crown jewels at the Tower of London. Well, you don't have the conveyor belt that you have at the Tower of London where you shuffle along. You only stand for a few minutes and then the guards move you on. But it was absolutely magnificent.
Yeah.
And I had an actual map of the Cairo Museum in one of my guidebooks, which, wait 1 second. It's literally around the corner. I've just got to stick.
You know what? I love a map. I will sit and wait, have a sip of my drink, and await the map. You should have maps in the beginning, in the front of the books. That would be amazing.
Here we go. So it's the Egyptian Guide to the Cook's Traveller's Handbook to Egypt and the Sudan. And in here, they've actually got an incredible map of, I won't show you the exact thing, but they've got the map that Clara would have been using, and so I could see where in those days they held the King Tut collection, which is different from now, and some of the artifacts are actually in the very same place that they were 100 years ago as well, according to this guide map, and then some of them were different as well. So I was able to see which galleries Clara would go into and where they might have had the officers, and it's all from this Cook's guidebook that I had.
Amazing, the amount of things that you can find that you were finding so many similarities. It's one thing to say, well, the pyramids haven't changed, but it's quite another to find other things from 100 years ago that are as they were.
Have changed. One thing that has changed, and I mentioned this at the back of the book, is that tourists aren't allowed to go up anymore. That there's photographs from the 1920s and 30s of tourists on the top having picnics on the top of the pyramids, and it's just absolutely shameless. And they stopped that in the 1950s. So there are certain things you can't crawl all over the pyramids like you could in those days, which is a good thing. Yeah. So I do bring that in. But I have this thing about there being dogs all over the place as well, and there were dogs all over the pyramids, and they're lying in little bits of shade that you could find. And I bring that into the book. I have one of these dogs walking around, standing in the guard's shadow, and that was straight out of my trip to Egypt.
I think you have to stop people climbing on things and going up things, because the wear and tear over the years, and people taking kind of bits of monuments, taken as a souvenir and thinking that's perfectly acceptable behaviour, when really it's beyond criminal damage.
Absolutely.
You can understand why they want to keep people away.
Yeah. I still get shocked when I see people walking on Hadrian's Wall here. And there's I live in Newcastle, so there's bits of the wall that are all over the place, just half a mile that way. There's bits of the wall. And people actually, there's nothing there saying don't walk on the wall. Whereas in Egypt, You absolutely cannot walk on. You can walk on.
Yeah.
They have certain sections that they allow you on, and very much demarcated and very much controlled. It's a World Heritage Site, and why don't they do the same to Hadrian's Wall? Perhaps because there's so many bits of it, they can't control it. Yeah.
I suppose, yeah, it would be quite a tricky thing unless
Yeah.
you've got people actively guarding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quite a tricky thing
Yes,
to do.
that's true. I mean, there's bits of wall in people's garden and all sorts of things. It is a little hard. It is a bit hard. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
But
you can't use that bit of your garden.
Yeah, but it's still, when I see it, I still sort of, you know, it's a 1,000-year-old wall.
Yeah. We have only got 3 minutes left.
Oh, gosh.
That hour has absolutely flown. Would you like to give everybody watching a recap of the 3 books in the Miss Clara Vale series so far?
Okay.
And so they know what they're going to go and buy and read if they haven't already.
Yep. Right, let me... number 1, The Picture House Murders, set in 1929, and it's about a fire at a local a picture house in Whitley Bay, which is near Newcastle upon Tyne. Picture house burns down. Someone dies. Clara has to investigate. Her first investigation when she's just inherited the detective agency from her uncle Bob.
And I will apologise. We did have them the right way round before, but because you've dropped out and come back in, they are back to front.
Right, let me try and redo that. Picture House Murders. Yeah. Right, Pantomime Murders, Book 2. Later the same year, 1920. This is set between Christmas and a couple of weeks before Christmas and New Year in 1929, just at the turn of the decade. Pantomime Murders. There is a fairy godmother in the pantomime of Cinderella who disappears in York. And she, after her last performance, she walks out of the theatre still wearing her gown and carrying her wand and is never seen again. Clara investigates. And then the one that we've discussed, which is the Pyramid Murders, it's set in February of 1930, so just a couple of months afterwards. And it's freezing cold, snowing in Newcastle, and Clara decides to go somewhere slightly warmer.
We've got another couple of comments as well. So, hi Richard, Sarah's husband saying hello. Donna's put them 100% on her TBR, and hers is arguably bigger than mine. So that is no.
Is what bigger than hers? Is what bigger than hers?
TBR, her to be read pile.
Oh, to be read pile, yeah.
Is enormous. And Donna's saying a stone on the pyramids was taller than her.
Sorry, a stone on the pyramids.
A stone on the pyramids was taller than her.
Oh, a stone on the pyramids, yeah. I went to try to go up the pyramids on this little route, and then I had once again a middle-aged menopausal moment sort of halfway up, and I had to be brought down again. It was very much a white woman abroad moment. So it was these stones are absolutely massive, and you've got to clamber up them. I'm only 5'2" as well, Donna.
I'm 5 foot, so it's.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll tower over you then.
Yeah, Donna loves to tower over me. Oh, thank you so much, Fiona. This hour has been blooming brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. And best of luck with the other 2 books, and fingers crossed for more Poppy Denver.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everyone for listening in. It's been lovely. Thanks. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
And that